Welcome back to JunkDrawer Studio. Today, we're gonna make some tonks. A tonk it's essentially a little tank for the game Tonks, a small tabletop war game of tank-based combat, essentially, from Ben over at Apocrypha Now. Links below for rules and Ben's Instagram and all the stuff that you need to know to get started playing Tonks if you have never heard of it. I've actually never played it before as of the time of recording this, but I needed to make tonks in order to give myself a chance to try. I still need to make scatter train and stuff like that. I will be making that train probably in a future video, so stay tuned for that if you like this one. This is the tonk that I ended up making. I love it. He's got a little triceratops on the front of it. The reason why it looks the way it does, with all the growth and the kind of like coppery look, the animal heads, is because I had a very specific vision for theme in mind for this one. Don't ask me why. I don't know if this necessarily screams tonk to you, or tank, or war, but I don't really like war theme in general. So I wanted to do something completely different, a little bit mystical and a little bit whimsical. And my idea was, imagine you come into this mysterious garden and there is some big overgrowth, like greenery and trees and bushes and flowers, and it's kind of dank and gross, but also kind of beautiful with like tons of greenery. You come across this big stone kind of opening, clearing, and there are these big overgrown, rusty, patinaed, tarnished statues that have come to life and have become tonks, I guess. Or maybe some sort of mad scientist came in and saw these gnarly, patinaed, tarnished statues and made them into tonks. I don't know. But that was kind of my vision, was that these used to be statues, in this case a triceratops, I guess, and kind of became a tonk, and now there's this big kind of war game playing out in this mystical garden clearing patio type of area. So let's jump into the crafting and you can see how I made these. I didn't start with a concept this time because I just wanted to get all of my bits out and kind of truly kit bash, smash bash, trash bash, whatever you want to call it. I made the base of the tonks all from these little toys that had these holes in the top to attach the turret to. And I just got out all my other little bits. This was a key piece. These are treads that I had before I even planned to make tonks. They're kind of a soft plastic, and I thought they would work absolutely perfectly as treads. I also just got all sorts of other junk and bits, little caps and rings, and these beads I used a lot as sort of like big industrial washers. I also used a ton of these little gears that were from some little robot kit. Similarly, this sprue is also from like a little robot kit that I found at a thrift store. Used a ton of that. And yeah, I just sort of sized everything up and made little groupings of how I could make these different bots. This was actually really hard to get started because I just wasn't sure where to start. So eventually I just sanded everything and started gluing stuff together because I just needed to get some sort of basic form down. Apologies for the camera shakes. I mounted it to my desk. I shouldn't have done that. I do fix that later in the video. Yeah, I just started using super glue and gluing bits together to see what happened. This was a really fun process. I used baking soda, which I used a lot to cure the glue, and it leaves this nice kind of rusty, crusty texture behind when you're making anything that's going to be kind of rusty or metallic. Spoiler alert, these are rusty and metallic in the end. I was really starting to like this base shape. I picked this toy because of this green piece that fit into them perfectly. I had a bunch of these, a bunch of the base kind of shapes, and I thought this would be perfect to make the rotating turrets that you need in a game of tonks. If you don't know, the turrets need to be able to rotate, so I needed to make sure that that was possible. Here I am making the basis of the top of the turret. I took these little round domes that I found on this robot kit toy thing, sized it up with some random bits of plastic, filled the gaps with some EVA foam, and now I'm sizing up the treads. Like I said, this was perfect, but they were a little big, so I actually cut them in half very carefully, and it was perfect. They were a little finicky to glue down, but with heaps of super glue, and again, that baking soda technique, I did get them in place eventually, and I don't think they are going anywhere. Here it is with some of the baking soda cleared off, and I'm loving the shape so far. Now is the first of many time-lapse montages you're going to see in this video of me attaching little greebles and greeblies. Greeblies? How do you pronounce that? I can never remember. Let me know in the comments. I'm adding mostly a lot of gears to the treads themselves here. I add even more greeblies later. And now I'm putting the turret top together. I just put heaps of super glue into that dome piece and slowly kind of held up that green stick piece that's going to attach to the body until the super glue dried. I attached a little sriracha cap to be the start of the turret, and this tiny little plastic bottle that's hollow at the back for the very tip of the turret. Next, I gathered all the aforementioned animal toys to put those little statue heads on the front of the tonks. I picked up these 4 animals as possible options and went with the Triceratops. I thought it was going to look really fun when I held it up, but I did feel like it needed a little bit more lift, so I added a not so sophisticated chunk of EVA foam to lift it off the front a little bit more. But with all the baking soda, I thought this was just kind of look like a rusty, welded on thing anyway, which is exactly what I was going for, so I wasn't worried about that. Time-lapse number 2 is me adding even more greeblies. I'm just going to say both so I don't get in trouble. I added all sorts of little things, bits of zip tie, bread tabs, which I love using. Of course, more little gears and bits from that robot kit that I mentioned. I also mentioned these little heishi beads, and I used these everywhere. I wanted them to look like big industrial washers paired with these tiny little plastic sort of rhinestones to make it look like bolts. I added a little bit more detail to the turret by way of that gear there and this random little plastic circle thing that I had, and I was super stoked with that extra detail. I also added this old chunk of a hairband that I had just to bulk out that turret and fill that gap a little bit. Also using the little back of a pen for that bottom black piece. Oh, this piece was really cool. I have no idea where this came from, probably some toy, but I thought this looked wicked cool. I don't know how practical this is, having these handles up at the turret, if we're talking real tanks, but this is a goofy animal tank, so I don't care. Oh yeah, I also made the hippo and the tiger one. Tiger? Lion. I know animals, I swear. The lion one is a little different. It's a little big, but I like that top. It's made of this sort of paint pot thing that I had. Obviously the lion and little bits of pen, different wheels from different toys, but mostly we're using a lot of the same bits. Those little gears from that robotics kit. The hippo one had slightly different treads, which were, I believe, also from that robotics kit. I also had this wicked exhaust thing that I found on a toy truck that I'd been wanting to use. And yeah, I just kind of mixed and matched different pieces. I wanted these to feel like they were in the same world, maybe made by the same person, but not necessarily all the same. I wanted them to have their own personality. This one has like a little antenna kind of thing on top. I really like these. I think maybe they should have been the same size a little bit, but I think they're close enough. I don't know. I haven't actually played a game of tonks yet. The eagle-eyed among you might have noticed I used this very same little plastic baby bottle thing for all 3 of the turrets. And that's because I had a fun idea for the blast markers. So real quick, the blast markers in tonks are just little bits of cotton. That's what the recommendation is, that you can just put next to your tonk to indicate that it has fired and needs to be reloaded. Well, I thought it would be cool if those bits of cotton blasts were actually coming out of the tonk, were something that you could clip in and out of the tip of the turret to make it look like it had just fired. So that was my plan. I took my beloved angle mitered shear and cut the width of these little sticks of wood. You also might have noticed I trimmed them down a little bit so they would fit snugly in the turret. They were just a hair too big initially. And then I just went to town adding spray tack and isopropyl alcohol to break the surface tension and cotton to make blast markers. I leaned them up very precariously to dry. I think these came out okay. I'd like to try this again. I don't absolutely love them, but as you'll see in the reveal, they look pretty good in the end. Now, on the topic of the blast markers, this is what it looks like with one of those in there. It's just kind of supposed to be like, it just blasts off and it just comes right out. I think that's cool. I might technically need 2 on one tank. There's like a little bit in the rule book where something kind of interesting happens and you essentially have to reload twice to be able to shoot again, and it's indicated by putting 2 blast markers near your tank. Now that doesn't really work with this approach, but I thought it was just too thematically and mechanically fun to make these, to not make these in this way. And I figure I'll maybe just keep some extra bits of cotton or maybe just like little tokens or something in my game so that if a tank would need to have 2 blast markers, I'll have a backup way to do that. I was so ready to get to the painting. This build took a long time. I put on some Mod Podge and black paint to seal everything up. I kept the turrets separate during this entire process. I didn't necessarily think that it would be a huge problem if I attached them, but it would just make it easier to paint, and once I attached them, I wouldn't have to worry about taking them on and off and potentially chipping the paint job midway through. And they really start to look mean and cool once they're all primed. Next, I took these 3 random toys that I had to test out some paint schemes. I've actually never done this before, but I thought it would be a good idea and probably something I should get into the habit of doing. So I quickly primed them just with 1 coat of the Mod Podge and black paint. I wasn't really worried about perfect coverage. And I brought out all the paints I wanted to test. So first I took this red copper. I just used this in my last video. I really like it. I also used this black sequin paint that I love from Folk Art, and some Vallejo special effects paints, the green rust, which is like a verdigris, and the galvanic corrosion, which is like a rust effects paint. First, I mixed the copper and the black sequin folk art paint together, and I made this really dark, rusty bronze looking color. I honestly love this. Spoiler alert, this is the color I end up going with. I also splotched on some brighter bits of copper to see how that would look. I then slathered the whole thing with the verdigris, and I was really excited with how this came out. I slapped it all over. I also took a clean paintbrush with some water that you can see me doing right here and removed some of it just to see if that would work. I did it on that and on the brighter copper, and I really like how the darker one came out. So that's the color scheme I ended up going with. Glad I did the test. I started applying that copper and black paint mixture, and I liked how it was looking. It was a little lighter than the test batch I had mixed up, which I kind of regret. I wish I had gone a little darker from the start. But this color was still wicked cool. I really liked this color. I intended to paint all the tanks this same color with the exception of the treads, which I'm mostly avoiding at this point because I want to paint those black. I made sure I painted the turrets, and again, I just really liked how this color was turning out. I just kind of wanted a dark, brassy copper look so that these kind of looked like old patinaed statues. I painted the hippo and the lion too off camera. Then, just like I did with the test paint, I did a bunch of the green rust from Vallejo all over all of the tanks, getting into all the nooks and crannies, and then I did go back with some water, as you can see here, and kind of try to clean up some of the bigger pools. I'm not really sure this step mattered all that much, to be honest. They look quite a bit different and darker, dry, but I think I liked it. I also think my lighting here is just not the best, so it looks especially dark. But they're starting to look really cool. At this point, I did decide I wanted them to be slightly different from each other. They were all just kind of dark and muted and similar looking. So first I took this Retributor armor from Citadel. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I don't know all the Warhammer lore. And I dry brushed it on the lion to bring out some more of those brighter metallic tones while keeping the recesses gritty, grimy, patinaed, and darker. I took the regular copper color without the black sequin color and did the same thing on the Triceratops. So this one would be the proper kind of coppery bronze one. It's harder to tell in the footage, but it did help a lot. And finally, I took this Grey Knight's steel metallic and dry brushed it all over the hippo. I went a little heavier handed with this one because I was kind of realizing at this point that I don't know if these metals really make sense, like having copper and steel. So I was kind of relying on the patina and the copper bits to look more like rust at this point. It's like the metals, do they make sense? Does it make sense having copper and metal and steel and patina and rust all on the same thing? I don't actually know because I'm not a metal expert. But what I do know is these are silly little fantasy tonks that are made up of statues that came to life and they've got animal heads on them. So I don't really care if it's accurate. To add to that rust, I did add some of the Vallejo galvanic corrosion paint to the hippo in particular, so that it would just read as like a different metal. I also went a little heavy-handed with this, but I do end up knocking it back a little bit. And here's what they looked like dry. I was really stoked with how these look. I didn't plan for them to be different colors until halfway through, but I was excited with this. They each had their own personality. This hippo was starting to look real gnarly, and I loved that. I then took a black acrylic wash that I made with just some black acrylic ink and water and slapped it over everything. Apologies for the lighting. I did this really late at night and didn't have my lighting set up. Yeah, I just slapped it over everything though. I wasn't worried about it being too dark because I do end up dry brushing yet again, as you can see here. And I know it seems like I'm repeating a lot of the same steps at this point, but it doesn't really feel like that. I mean, yes, you could stop. You don't have to keep doing the same steps and building up these layers, but I think it adds a lot of depth and a lot of a more interesting color when you have all these slight variations of layers. Speaking of doing the same thing again, I also went back in with the verdigris and the rust on the respective tanks to just add a little bit more concentrated bits to the specific areas where I think these textures would be pooling up, as opposed to just slapping it all over the whole thing. And again, yeah, I'm kind of repeating steps at this point, but I can't argue with the results. Before we move on, it is time for a new segment that I introduced last video called The Question of the Video. I want to learn more about my audience, so if you want to answer this question, I would be so grateful. Write your answer in the comments below. The question of the video today is, who is your favorite crafting YouTuber? You can use that term as loosely as you want. If they're art related in some way, I want to hear about them. I want to learn about new YouTubers. I want to spread awareness about other cool crafting YouTubers out there. So let me know who your favorites are down below. And let's make sure we're being nice and not commenting on other people's in a way that's going to be like, I don't like them. I mean, I assume we're all adults here. Actually, I have no idea if we're all adults. But anyway, be nice is my point. And bonus, if you want to mention your favorite non-crafting YouTuber, tell me that too. It's late at night. I'm looking at these. They're going to look better with the treads painted and with the turrets attached. And I like them. I do. I think they look really good. They're pretty gnarly. I'm happy with them. They're pretty much what I was picturing. I feel like they're missing a pop of color. Now you could stop here, but I'm going to do something a little risky. I think I'm going to bust out some acrylic paint markers and add some graffiti. I don't know why I'm stressed. It's going to be great. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And do it I indeed did. You can see here I was very hesitant at first. I really was kind of already sort of regretting it, but I kind of just went full steam ahead and added little bits of graffiti to all of the tanks. I did use very specific colors on each of them, again, so that they would each have sort of their own unique look and personality, because after all, this is for a game, so I wanted each of the tanks to look unique, but still sort of live in this same world. So on this tank, I did white. I also added teal later. You see that in the final results, but I didn't actually film myself adding the teal. And you might disagree with this. You might think this looks awful, but I liked how these looked. I really do. I think that it's more my style. I'll just say that. It's more my style. It's colorful. I don't know when to hold myself back, but I'm okay with it. I know it looks really janky and you might be thinking I ruined them, but I really like how the graffiti looked. I also knocked it back with a third dry brush If you thought I was just about to show you a third time lapse of me dry brushing the same colors onto the same tonks, you were wrong. I'm not that cruel. We can move on to the next part. So yeah, in this footage, I'm painting the treads black, but you can see how the graffiti did get knocked back yet again with a little bit more dry brush. On this one, it kind of just looks like verdigris because I used a bit of that teal with the white, but I like it. It's more subtle than it looked in that previous shot of the graffiti. It looks more worn and realistic and lived in, and I'm just stoked with this. Since I already went in and added a ton of graffiti to what could have been called done, I decided to add even more detail with some mossy kind of growth. Again, the theme of these is like, you know, garden statues come to life, or statues been made into tanks by some mad scientists kind of a vibe. So I expect they'd have a bunch of growth, especially if it's the former description of the theme, like where these just kind of came to life. They were probably dormant for a really long time and then kind of became tanks. So I thought adding a lot of growth was not only a cool little thematic touch, and it also kind of helped me fill some gaps in the construction of these tanks. The hippo in particular, I went pretty heavy-handed, but I like it. And here are all my tanks with the growth. Now it's important to note they're still wet in this. It does dry a little bit more muted and a little bit darker, but man, this one just looks so mean. I'm really happy with how this one came out. And as a final step, I wanted to add a little bit of dirt. So I took those Vallejo products that you saw in the previous shot, mixed a little bit of them together, and just slapped on the dirt, mostly onto the bottom of the treads and the wheels and across the tank, a little tiny bit here and there on the top, but again, mostly to the bottom. When it's wet, it's a little dark and slimy looking, but when it dries, like you see here, it does look more, well, dry and matte and really cool. I forgot to film an outro, so I'm recording this on my phone. Thank you for watching. These were so fun to make. I know I say that all the time and throughout the video, but I really am passionate about this, and I just like making art. I want to make more. So consider subscribing, doing all the YouTube stuff. I hate doing these calls to action, but they are kind of necessary. Even just watching the video and sharing it with someone who you think might like it is a huge support and a big help to my channel, and I really appreciate it. If you want to see me finish the full set of Scattertrain that I'm going to need to play a game of Tonks, I'll probably make a video about it in the future. So consider subscribing if you want to see that. I've got a lot of cool videos planned for the next couple months, so stay tuned. And without further ado, here's the final reveal.
Perfect.